I winced in pain as a couple of my co-workers helped me climb into the helicopter. Most of the Rangers were still going after the Bigfoot, on ATVs, on foot, in trucks. I was in too much a state of frenzy to identify who was who, but I begged for a radio so that I could keep in touch with them and give them important intel. I lay on my left side to try to slow the blood oozing from the spot where my leg had been, and gripped onto something as the helicopter took off. The view of the forest and mountains from this high was so stunning I almost forgot how much pain I was in.
Does anyone have eyes on the creature?
I heard over the radio.
That's a positive. He's running straight down the north slope.
Another voice replied, although it was difficult to discern each phoneme over the loud noise of the wind. I craned my neck to look out the door of the helicopter and indeed saw Bigfoot barreling down the slope of Wild Bluff Pass. His movements were more panicked, but at this point, in my mind, I thought he was invincible.
Don't get too close to it,
I begged.
This is the thing that killed Ron and Lisa, and I just saw it kill 12 cultists effortlessly.
There was a moment of silence over the airwaves.
Whose radio is that? Can you just shut that off? We can't hear what you're saying.
An irritated voice sounded. Shit, they must not be able to hear me over the helicopter. I was already too far away to see what had happened, and the Bigfoot had disappeared behind the tall trees. We were already leaving Jasper and entering the countryside. I assumed I was being airlifted to Rocky View General Hospital in Calgary. All I could do now was listen helplessly over the radio.
It's in the forest now. Keep after it.
Confident voice said.
Nick, you keep moving north. Wendy, head to the east. Cut it off if it changes direction. You guys have tranks, right? Roger that.
A couple voices said.
It's moving slower in the trees. I still have eyes on it.
I recognized the voice of authority as the senior ranger, Jack. Every 30 seconds or so, he pinged its approximate location. I could hear the whir of the ATVs and twigs snapping over the radio.
North-northeast. East-northeast. East-northeast. Due east. Due north.
The pursuit continued. I could tell by the pings that the Bigfoot was heading back towards its lake. I was surprised it was so readily willing to give up where it lived.
Wait. Everyone stop.
Jack's stern voice broke the pattern.
I don't see it. Did anyone see where it went? Sir, I think it's just still behind that tree.
A more timid voice that I didn't recognize spoke up.
You saw it go behind that tree?
Jack confirmed.
Yes, sir. I'm pretty sure it's still behind there. Nobody move. I'm gonna go check this out.
Jack held his radio line open, and I could hear him walking over the forest floor, leaves crunching and twigs snapping under his feet. Although I couldn't see, I imagined that he was maneuvering around the tree without wanting to get too close.
Just don't see anything. No, stay back. Just let me check it out.
I could hear Jack inching closer and closer to the tree. There was a shuffling noise from one of the radios.
Watch out!
I heard the recruit scream suddenly. There was a horrible grunting noise, and Jack let out a brief yell before I heard a wet crumpling. I hadn't even realized, but my helicopter landed and the blades had slowed down. What's going on? What happened? I was panicked.
Its hand came out from behind the tree. It pulled Jack into the tree and just smushed him into it between his fingers.
The horrified recruit replied.
It's still there. It's just watching us from behind the tree. Half its face is sticking out.
Use the tranks, I yelled back, although I wasn't entirely sure if that would work. I could hear the sound of a couple trank guns firing. Then, silence.
It's running again, in the same direction as before. Oh my god, Jack, we gotta get help. Do not pursue.
Nate's voice came over the radio.
Let it go and regroup. This thing's already put 2 people in the hospital. Jack isn't going to the hospital,
the recruit said sullenly.
Even more reason then.
Nate sounded resolute. Nate was the second in command after Jack, and no one argued, except for Damien.
Nate, let me track it by myself, please.
I could hear him over the radio.
I'll keep my distance, I promise. We need to find its lair. We may never see it again. You might be right, Damien, but I can't ask you to do that. I'm doing it.
Damien said, determined.
Well, I won't stop you then. Get going.
Medical staff had loaded me onto a stretcher, but I didn't want to let go of the radio. Just before I was pulled into the hospital, I figured the recruit could use a piece of advice. Hey Damien, can you hear me?
Yeah, what's up?
I don't know how it does it, but this creature knows when you're looking at it if you've been looking for more than 2 seconds. I was tracking it from Wild Bluff, 20 kilometers away the other day, and it knew I was looking at it and started running towards me, even at that distance.
Jesus Christ.
I heard Nate mutter. I know it sounds like some supernatural bullshit, but just trust me. When you're tracking it, 2-second peaks, and then just keep moving.
Alright, thanks. I got it.
I turned off my radio out of respect for the others in the hospital. 4 hours passed and I was out of surgery. I turned on my radio, but the channel they had been using was dead. My car was still at the residence, and I realized it was going to be an expensive Uber ride back to Jasper. But I needed to be there. I needed to find out what was going to happen. It was an anxious drive as the sunlight faded behind the mountains, and darkness fell just as I got back to the residence. I limped out to the common room on my crutches to find out what was going on. It looked like I'd made it just in time, as Damien was there and was surrounded by a number of the other rangers. Damn, you got out soon. Are you feeling alright? Everyone looked alarmed to see me limping in without a leg. You really should take some time off, Nate said in a scolding tone. I will. I'll stay in my room for a couple weeks, but I really want to be here for this. Yeah, fair enough, Nate said. We could use some of your insight. Why didn't you report this thing? He sounded mildly angry. Why do you think? I asked. Yeah. There was a moment of silence in the room. I can't believe Jack's gone, one of the recruits was still saying to himself. Let's just try to stay strong, Nate chimed in. It's what Jack would want. Damien, what happened? I asked as someone gave up a comfy seat for me and I shambled into it. Well, I followed him all right. He went to this small lake in the northeast. Just south of it was that little cabin where Ron and Lisa got eaten by that bear. Yeah, that wasn't a bear, I finally admitted. Everyone stared at me wide-eyed. I'm sorry. I just knew no one would believe me. The room stayed silent for a moment, and then Damien continued. In the forest, just slightly northeast of that lake, the creature has quite a pavilion set up. A pavilion? I was surprised, but intrigued. Yeah, it's like a giant tent. It looked like it was made out of human skin, if I'm being honest. Here and there was a patchwork of scalps, with the hair still in. Oh my god, I muttered. I made a note of the coordinates, and then we called in the RCMP, the federal police. It's in their hands now. Are they gonna kill it? I asked. I think their plan is to capture it. They're already in there. They have it surrounded with floodlights, but I think they're waiting for backup to make a move. Jeez, how do you know this? They're keeping in touch with Nate on radio. I looked over to Nate and he nodded. It's completely surrounded, but it backed away into its skin tent. It had a kind of a tarp doorway that it closed over itself, and now they don't have a visual. The backup's supposed to arrive in 3 hours, and then they're gonna make their move. Nate finished explaining. Jesus, I said. There's still some blood coming through your bandages. You should really lie down. I know. I'll keep in touch with you through radio, don't worry. Nate instructed me to go to my quarters, so I did so, and lay down with my radio for the next 3 hours, craving any kind of news or update.
More federal trucks rolling in.
Nate relayed the brief message. Are any of you guys going out to be there?
No, we're not allowed,
Nate said mockingly.
Trust me, you're not missing anything. Just try to get some sleep. Most of us have already packed up down here anyway. This'll all be over in the morning.
The night was quiet, and about 2 hours after Nate's last contact, I heard gunshots rolling over the trees. I couldn't sleep. I climbed over to my windowsill on my crutches and peered out into the haze. The one residence floodlight battered the gravel parking lot in yellow. I pulled a chair up to the windowsill, just in case anything went by, although the lake was at least 30 or 40 kilometers away, and I didn't expect to see anything. I woke up, feeling a strange sensation. I hadn't remembered falling asleep, but I was resting my head in the nook of my right elbow. I was groggy and had been drooling. There was no sound. In a half-trance, I lifted my head and looked out the window. From the dim light where the gravel parking lot met the tree line, Bigfoot stood, smiling up at me. I was breathless, and my eyes opened wider. He raised a finger to his lips and backed into the tree line where I could no longer see him. I was wide awake now. My heart was pounding and my hairs were standing on end. I checked my phone. It was 5 a.m., 40 minutes till sunrise. Most of the other rangers got up at around 5:30. I threw on some clothes and tried to carefully make my way down to the common room. Nate was still there, half dozed off with his radio in his hand. He'd clearly been up all night, waiting for new information. "What's going on? Have you heard anything new?" I asked him, as he shook himself awake. No, I haven't heard anything." "Are you sure you didn't sleep through it?" I asked impatiently. "There's no way. My radio's set to max volume. Don't you think we should have an update on the operation by now? The backup arrived 5 hours ago." Nate's brow furrowed as other rangers started to pour into the room, also looking for updates. Nate got on his radio and tried the RCMP. There was no response. He waited a minute and tried again. All of us stood around silently. A channel was open on one of the frequencies, but it was just static. "I saw the Bigfoot half an hour ago just outside the residence." "What?" People were alarmed as they looked at me. "I don't know what's going on, but I think we should proceed with extreme caution." "What? Are you sure about that?" Nate looked annoyed with me. "If Bigfoot was here, did he kill the RCMP? Or did he sneak out somehow?" Damien chimed in. "I don't know, but if the line of communication is down, I don't know what to do. I think the safest call is to stay here. We can't just wait here forever," Nate said, annoyed. "Everyone, get your tranquilizers, get in the trucks. We'll go to the lake, and if the RCMP turns us away, they turn us away. But this is our park, and we're not gonna sit here forever. Stay sharp. I don't want to lose anyone else. And if we see that creature, you're to fire the tranquilizer on sight. Understood?" "I don't know, guys. It feels like we're walking into a trap." "A trap?" Nate said, exasperated. "It's an ape." "Nate, I'm begging you. I promise you this thing is intelligent. It's very intelligent. I don't know what it's capable of. I don't know what it might have done, but I have a really bad feeling and I don't think we should leave the residence." "That's enough," Nate said sternly. "You stay here. Everyone else to the trucks. Now." Damien gave me a flat-mouthed stare and then obeyed Nate's order. Everyone armed themselves with their tranquilizer guns and then piled into the trucks. The engines purred and they were starting to roll out. I watched them go from the window next to the door of the residence. Not 30 seconds had passed before there was a loud crash up the road. I gasped and hobbled out into the parking lot to see what had happened. There was a massive, gaping pit in the middle of the road, and all 3 of the trucks had fallen into it. From the sides of the pit, leaves and twigs had sprouted. It was a pit trap, like the Bigfoot had seen me use on it. He was pulling my screaming co-workers out through the windows of the trucks and throwing them into a mesh grass net that he had clearly woven somehow. No! I couldn't believe what was happening, and I started hobbling over on my crutches. But as he dragged Wendy out by her hair and tossed her into his net, he had finished his task. He paid me no mind and bolted off into the tree line, dragging his screaming, bumping net behind him. He was already well out of sight by the time I got over to the pit. A single tranquilizer gun lay on top of the pit, and I grabbed it, threw it over my back, and kept going into the forest on my crutches. I knew this forest and the route to the lake well, and I could even see Bigfoot's footprints in the mud. He wasn't bothering to cover his tracks this time. It took me 8 hours hobbling through that woods to get there. My hands were calloused and sore, but I just kept pushing. The creature had taken all of my friends, everyone I had spent time with over the last 4 years, and I was going to do everything in my power to stop it. As I arrived at the cabin and the lake, I could see what had become of the RCMP. There was blood everywhere. Their trucks were smashed. Their guns lay all over the ground. There were fires in the trees and bushes, and a thick coat of smoke hung over the lake. I couldn't see the other side. I hobbled around the east side of the lake. I didn't remember precisely where Damien said the Bigfoot's hideout was, but I'd followed it enough that I had an idea. I actually found its hut first. It was indeed a massive structure built among the trees, human skin of all shades, leathered and stretched thin. It smelled foul, and sure enough, Damien had been right about the scalps. I peered through a hole in it to see inside. The layout was simple, and there was a large hole dug in the middle of the tent, where I assumed the Bigfoot had dug himself out to get the drop on the unsuspecting RCMP from another part of the forest, but there was no sign of the creature. I looked behind me and gasped, as I assumed he would be standing there, but this time he wasn't. I circumnavigated the macabre tent and made my way back out towards the lake, and there he was. He was working on something. Just next to the water sat the back of a pickup truck, just the back. There were people sitting in it, along its edges like a hot tub. I scrambled to get closer, unsure of what was going on. Damien screamed as he was pulled out of the sack. "No, let him go!" I called out, but Bigfoot had no interest in me anymore, it seemed. He was holding some sort of horsehair-looking wire. Bigfoot wedged his left thumb into Damien's screaming mouth and ripped his jaw downward, tearing it off loosely. He bent Damien's head back and shoved the horsehair wire up his throat and into his brain. I threw my crutches to the side and dropped to the ground. I took aim with the tranquilizer gun and fired, hitting Bigfoot square in the back. He literally didn't even seem to notice. He loaded Damien into the back of the truck with the other 15 people. From this distance, I could see that they were all convulsing, eyes rolled back in their heads. They hadn't died yet. They had clearly been forced into a very unnatural state. "Why? What is this?" I roared as I reloaded the tranq gun and fired again. Bigfoot turned to me, and for the first time he wasn't smiling. He had a dead, serious look on his face, like he wasn't playing around. With one hand he picked me up by the arms and squeezed them together, crushing them. I screamed as he tossed me over his shoulder towards whatever twisted device he was building. My co-workers and the RCMP in the back of the truck were making a loud, gurgling noise. The truck had been filled so that they were sitting in a shallow pool of water, and the horsehair wire connected their brains to one another. Bigfoot took one line of wire from the center of the device and drew it out into the lake. He had turned to face me again. He lifted his left eyelid and fed a second line of wire deep under it. He climbed out of the water and turned to face the lake. There was a hum of electrical energy, and the smoke over the lake disappeared. I was transfixed on the still pool as I watched the reflection of its surface change. It no longer reflected the forest and mountains of Jasper. The image reflected instead showed ferns, plant life I had never seen before, and a pterodactyl flying overhead. On the far bank, a triceratops was drinking from the water. Bigfoot removed the wire from his eye and waded into the water. A thick fog rolled in and cleared, and that was the last I ever saw of Bigfoot.